Welcome back to In This Corner with Cyrus Fees, and I'm Cyrus Fees, and we have a special episode as it rolls on here. We just heard from Pat Contry, of course, Pat the NES Punk on YouTube, and now we are keeping it with, kind of some influencers that love MMA and love wrestling, but just have a different role. Not necessarily going to bring in former WWE champion or former UFC champion, but we do have a podcast champion, and they call him the Podfather. He is the owner of First Family Mortgage in Huntsville, Alabama, the host of 83 Weeks with Eric Bischoff, host of The Arn Show with Arn Anderson, What Happened When with Tony Schiavone, Grilling JR with JR, and then, of course, Something to Wrestle with Bruce Pritchard. There's a lot of websites. I can't even try to list all those, but adfreeshows.com, the main one. And then the founder of Starrcast. And you know what? He was married into the Flair family. It's an amazing story. Conrad Thompson in the house.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me. You just listed my whole resume there. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I tried to, man. I tried to. I kind of blow people away. They're like, oh, wow, I did that. But how's everything going for you? You're down there in Alabama at the Conradison, the affectionate name for your house. And how has the pandemic affected you just in general? That's how this was all brought about. So I love to hear kind of everybody's stories and their thoughts on this crazy life that we're living right now.
Well, it created adfreeshows.com. That's for sure. I had more free time. We weren't doing live shows every weekend and no more conventions. So I filled it with a new sort of super site with all of the content that we're creating, not just podcast wise, but now a bunch of new video stuff. And we seem to be having fun there. So I guess it hasn't been all bad news, but yeah, I'm ready for things to get back to normal, whatever that may be. And whenever that may be, I'm ready to go to some shows again. I'm a little jealous that you still get to do stuff like that, but yeah, we fans, maybe not so much.
Yeah, I don't know. My nose is assaulted on a daily basis, so I don't know necessarily that you want to be about that life. It can get a little bit sticky, but yeah, it is nice to be able to get out of the house sometimes. Sorry, my cat's doing things here in the studio, just doing whatever she wants. Anyways, we may leave that in. That being said, thoughts on how the UFC and all the wrestling shows have kind of handled everything, because obviously everybody had to divert. I think UFC did a pretty good job doing what they did. They basically just took their whole show and went to Abu Dhabi and did all their shows over there, did some things in Vegas. And then, obviously WWE and AEW, a lot of studio stuff. What's your take on it? Just the overall product?
Yeah, I think everybody's tried to make the best of a bad situation. And from a business standpoint, I mean, I think a lot of those companies had their best year ever. The idea that AEW was able to still be profitable in the middle of, the most unique circumstance ever is really something as a startup. But I think the UFC and WWE may have had, two of their very best years ever. So kudos to them for figuring out a way to adapt. And I guess that's important for any business that's going to be sustainable long-term. You've got to sort of roll with the punches. And I think when this is all said and done, people will study what WWE and UFC did, because in spite of some really challenging circumstances where we see businesses going out of business left and right, that is not the case for those two, man. Somehow they keep making landmark deals and selling more than ever. So good for them.
Yeah, they're good businessmen and good teams behind it. And we can go on and on about, Vince and how he always seems to kind of roll with the punches to this day with his outfit. But let's talk about you a little bit more. Let's talk a little bit about the history, and we'll kind of do the Cliff Notes version, because I know like you tend to kind of get sidetracked as well. I do that often on this show. And I usually have 15 or 20 questions lined up and usually only get through about 3 or 4 of them. That being said, growing up in Alabama, we'll just skip the whole childhood stuff. Obviously a huge fan of the business, but you get involved in the mortgage business and make a good amount of money, and you kind of push yourself into the business a little bit. And I think it started with an ECW documentary with Shane Douglas. And is that kind of how it all kind of got rolling as far as kind of working with talent and kind of getting to know these guys?
I mean, I guess working with talent was really when, Ric Flair asked me to do his podcast. I mean, that was
I thought it was before that. I thought the ECW stuff was before that. Am I off on the timeline?
No, you're not. But I mean, I made a donation to Kickstarter. I mean, that was
I understand.
That was it. My sort of major collecting fandom started at the end of 2012 when I bought a Ric Flair robe And then in early 2013, I was able to land the big gold belt and was having a lot of fun. And somewhere in there, I saw they were doing a Kickstarter for an ECW documentary, and I love ECW. It's my absolute favorite. You see the old ECW arena sign behind me there.
I
So
do indeed.
I made a big donation, and one of the perks was they would screen the movie at your house with an ECW alumni. I thought that's the coolest thing ever. So I invited like a dozen of my buddies over, and we watched the documentary with Shane Douglas, and had a steak and had some beers and told some old stories, and it was fantastic. And I guess it became sort of my low key introduction to interviewing wrestlers, and I didn't know that at the time, but eventually, when I started doing Rick's podcast, that came in handy, I suppose, because I have zero broadcast experience, never went to school for any of this. Nobody ever gave me any pointers and said,
Yeah.
here's how you do it. I just sort of self-taught and worked real hard and tried real hard, and effort counts. Effort matters.
No, it definitely does. And you know, having the schooling is one thing, but it's real world experience and just doing it. And you just by chance, by hook, by crook, you have a very calming voice. And I don't know if that's because I listen to you often and I've listened to the shows for a long time, but it's just a very comfortable voice. And I think that's a big part of podcasting. I think some of the best hosts out there have that very comforting voice, and it's so very conversational and it just kind of rolls off the tongue. Is that something that you feel like you had early on, like with the Woo Nation show with Ric Flair, or do you feel like it's just kind of something that's come over time?
Well, I mean, I got more comfortable as you do it, of course, with anything else. But I mean, I had been in sales my whole life, so I was really comfortable, pitching, so to speak, and talking to strangers. And that wasn't really something I was uncomfortable with. And I wasn't uncomfortable sort of putting myself out there. I'd advertised my mortgage company on local TV and radio for years and years and years at that point. So I was really comfortable on a microphone or in front of a camera or whatever. And there were no jitters of, what if I look stupid? I just learned
Yeah.
to who cares? You'll get over it. You'll live. It's not going to be painful.
Well, and it's not about you most of the time anyway. If you're interviewing somebody, they
Yeah,
don't care what you're saying or what you
exactly.
look like, et cetera. You're right.
I made it. I made the analogy that in this situation, if my business were a strip club, I would be the pole. Like no nobody's here to see me. Nobody's here. They didn't come here for me. They came here for them, and it's my job
Yeah.
to just do my job. So that's the deal. I'm doing my job, and to my surprise, people dig sort of my interview style and the research and the format that we came up with. So
Yeah.
it's really just been rinse, lather, repeat. If I'm honest, once we did the Woo Nation thing, I got to just learn, and then I started my own Ric Flair show, and I got to format it, and I knew I wanted to accentuate the positives, hide the negatives, the old Paul Heymanism, and we formatted it like a real radio show. And when I had the luxury of meeting and hanging out and working with Bruce Pritchard at the mortgage company, he's such a great storyteller that I thought, man, this is a show. Let's abandon the interview format and let's just do a deep dive on one topic and just set you up to tell stories. And I'll just ask fan questions. And I thought I was qualified to do that. I'm a wrestling fan. I'm the target audience. So I think that was the dynamic that really made a difference. All the other wrestler podcasts at the time were just the veteran in the wrestling game
Yeah.
talking and interviewing other wrestlers. But when you inserted a fan in there who was well researched and wasn't afraid to challenge the talent, it was a hit, and something to wrestle was off to the races.
Did you feel like, and look, boom, sidetrack, just like that. Do you feel like you were like somewhat of a historian before you got into that? Or was it when you started doing the deep dives, doing all the research, event by event, year by year, going through all these observers, et cetera, that you feel like you picked that knowledge up? Or did you already have that? Was that something you can kind of lay claim to early on?
I wasn't then, and I'm not now a historian. I'm just a fan. And I know that sounds cliche, but I mean, the reality is I have access to the same things
Yeah,
everybody else does. I mean,
I get it. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
read a lot of wrestling books. I watch a lot of shoot interviews. I subscribe to the Observer. I subscribe to the Torch. I read Mike Johnson stuff and Sean Ross Sapp. So I'm doing what everybody else is doing. I'm just willing to put in the time to copy paste it all together and then format it. So every show I've done, I don't know, since maybe the fifth or sixth, whenever the Vader and Pillman shows were, I've got tons of notes for every single show before we click record. I mean, in
Yeah.
some cases, I'd have 70 pages. We just did Jim Ross yesterday morning. I had 14 pages. I hope to do Bruce Pritchard later tonight. I've got 17 pages. I'm ready. So I'm researched. I'm organized. I've got my notes. And I think that's really one of the other differences in our show is The real work, and you know this, happens before you click record.
For
Once
sure.
you click record, now you're just having fun. But it's the research and the formatting and the promotion that's really going to make your show successful. And none of that involves actually talking into a microphone.
Yeah, working with a guy like JR, which I know he's a notes guy, and does a lot of prep. He has to appreciate that. That has to be something that him, just knowing who he is and how he operates, he has to appreciate all the notes you put in to a show.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Everybody I work with looks forward to getting the notes, and it works to sort of jog their memory. And if I'm just hitting them cold, and sometimes they do enjoy that. Like if we're watching a show, Eric Bischoff won't want to look at the notes, won't have his own opinion, and not necessarily be influenced. And I like that. But if it's a bio show, then he needs the notes, and he wants to dig into it and sort of jog his memory, and then he'll make his own notes. So we do it all through Google Docs. So if they want to log in and make their own notes, they can. Not everybody does that, but occasionally they will. And that's been a formula that works for us.
So, you do the Woo Nation thing, and you're working with Ric Flair, and you shot right to the top. It's not like you started off working out with Mark Marrow and, doing a podcast with Duke Drosy. You went straight to Ric Flair, which is awesome. I kind of need to know how that came about. I mean, that it was so accessible to get in front of Rick and to be able to get him on board for this podcast thing.
I didn't pitch him. He pitched me. We were together in Nashville hanging out. He did this like waiting for wishes deal where you have like a celebrity waiter. And so since it's 2 hours up the road, he said, "Hey, do you want to come hang out?" I said, "Absolutely." So I actually got sick that night and wasn't able to really hang out. I had like the worst headache ever. Like I thought I was going to die. So I went and laid down in the hotel. And then the next morning, he's got to head back. So we met downstairs and had a drink. And he said, "Hey man, what do you know about podcasting?" I said, "Well, I mean, I know what it is." And he says, "How do you get it? How do you listen to it? Can you make money with that?" And I'm like, "Where's all this coming from?" And he explained that his agent had an offer from CBS for him to do a podcast. So he asked my opinion on it, and we talked about it. And eventually he called me like a month later and said, "Hey kid, I'm in the podcasting business." And that was it. So fast forward a few weeks later, and he said, "Hey, would you come in for the first show and just ask fan questions?" I said, "Sure. Yeah, that'd be great." And he said, "Well, you just know a lot about my career, and I know you're comfortable being on the radio through the mortgage deal. If you would just ask fan questions, that would make me more comfortable." And I'm like, "What aren't you comfortable with?" And he said, "Well, it's just, I won't have anybody to really play off of. Just me and the microphone feels weird." And the idea that the greatest interview of all time wasn't comfortable with that, but he always wanted to interact with someone, mean by God Gene and all this stuff. He needs to bounce it off of somebody. So I got it. So I said, "Sure." So I had this whole career like in an hour-long format and a bunch of notes. And when I showed up with the notes and I was prepared, the producer for CBS was like, "Who did this?" And I said, "I did." And he's like, "Dude, this is like really professional. Can you do this next week when we have Harley Race or whoever it was?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So I became an accidental podcaster. It wasn't ever the plan to be a co-host or be involved in the show, but he dug it and CBS dug it. So I became an accidental podcaster, but this was never the plan. I didn't pitch Rick. I didn't have an idea that this would be fun or lucrative, any of that.
Yeah. And it's funny because, a lot of guys, I'm sure, have seen your success and thought, I need to do that too. And there was even times when I thought the same thing, when I was like, and I think I may have even messaged you about it. And I was like, somebody should do Scott Steiner. And I'm like, "Oh," and then you're like, "Well, dude, if you get Scott Steiner, to commit to something, then congratulations." But you just think, the wilder, the better. Yeah. Is this going to be, but that's not what yours is. It's not that. It's more, you can count on these guys every time they have a good outlook. It's going to be interesting, but it's not that wild, crazy personality. It's somebody that was there and has the stories. And that's what people really treasure. But I think there's probably so many people that have probably reached out to you and said, "Okay, I want to be that guy now. I want to get a wrestler. I want to, whoever that guy might be." I'm sure you've heard that quite a bit, right?
Oh yeah. I get it at least 5 times a day. And my advice is always the same thing. It's, you have to have a business plan. Like, we say something around the office. If you want me to do it, tie some money to it. The idea that these guys are going to dedicate time out of their life every single week and put forth effort and not have a return on that and make no money, it's not going to be sustainable.
No.
I mean, you might be able to sell it for a little while, but that's the reason you see
tough.
so many
with a wrestler. That's going to be tough.
Yeah. I mean,
You know what I mean?
they might do 4 episodes, they might do 17 episodes, but you're not getting to year 2. So you've got to have a real
No,
sustainable business model of how are we going to monetize this and how is this going to be something more than just a hobby? And that's the difference is a lot of people who want to do this approach it from a hobby standpoint. I approach everything with a very business like approach. Here's how we're going to make money. Here's how we're going to monetize it. Here's how we can grow the thing. And we've been very lucky that every year we've had year over year growth. We haven't went backwards on one show, not one year. Every year is a little better. And that's the way you hope any business goes. But if you don't have that business mind and you just think, well, this looks like fun, it can be, but it's also work. And the work aspect is what you need to be compensated for. Not just you, but the wrestler.
of course.
And my goal was always to sell mortgages. Whether we sold any t-shirts or any live tickets or ad-free shows or ads, I didn't
That was
really
just
care.
bonus. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all gravy. I wanted to sell mortgages, and that's working. So we're doing more mortgages than ever. And as you see online, people complain I have more ads than ever. So I created an ad-free universe where you see all the same content, but no commercials. But how could I sell a wrestler on that? I've got to tie some money to it. So here we come Patreon, and it's working. The boys are happy, and so are the fans.
Well, listen, Conrad, I constantly have to pull my phone out, hit that little plus 15 for a second. I'm like, yeah, I'm good. I'm good with Manscaped. I'm good with that. Bop, bop, bop. And I do it. I need to just go ahead and subscribe to ad-free shows. Clearly.
Yeah, it's $9 a month, and you get so much content. I don't know why you wouldn't.
I don't know either.
If you hate the ads, it's a great way to do it. And what's great is every now and again, I see like people complain, like, oh, it's too expensive. And I'm like, dude, do you realize that I'm about to announce the 6th podcast. Chris Hero's our 6th podcast, but I'm about to announce a 7th podcast. So you're talking about when you chop up that $9, like everybody gets $1. I don't think that's crazy.
No.
Hey, will you pay Jim Ross $1 to hear his shows all month this month with no commercials? Of course. So
of course you will.
There we are, $9 a month.
Yeah, you are good at selling things. I got to say. Starrcast happens. I was happy to be a part of it. Had a blast in Chicago. It went over incredibly. I think you were pretty blown away with what it was and what it turned into. And I was too. I mean, I think the one thing that really amazed me more than anything, it wasn't the panels. I knew that was going to be good. I mean, on paper, that's going to be entertaining. But just with the amount of money that wrestling fans were willing to shell out over a period of a weekend between meet and greets and merchandise and, autographs, et cetera. It really blew my mind. And wrestling fans they're just their own beings. They're their own type of people from all different backgrounds. You see guys that you would see up in an office. You see a guy that you would see down at the local bar. You see everything at a wrestling convention with wrestling fans, but they spent so much money. That had to just be, as a business guy, you had to just be like, oh my God, like this is incredible. Did you already know going in that was going to be the case, or were you very much pleasantly surprised?
I mean, I was comfortable with our price points and I was comfortable with our value proposition, like what we were offering and what we're asking for it. But I didn't expect that many people. I thought it would be successful, but man, it was as grassroots as it gets, the whole all in event. I don't keep a lot of, you see a lot of old ring use belts and stuff, but stuff I participated in, I don't keep a lot of that stuff because it's like, I was there. I don't really care, whatever. Yeah. But I have an all in turnbuckle behind me and I'll never get rid of that because that was such a landmark show. And it was so important for the history of wrestling. And it's like, dude, I'll never part with this. This is one of the coolest things ever. And just to be involved in that and be a part of it, it was a Cody calls it a revolution and people sort of poked fun at that at one point, but it really was. It was really important for wrestling and to be a part of it was awesome. And everybody felt the same. So yeah, we had an overwhelming amount of people and I learned a lot about planning and what to do and what not to do. So I was really challenged to do another one. And of course we had a run of bad luck with the whole Undertaker and then Ric Flair got sick that week and was hospitalized. So then it was like, all right, I got to prove I can do this bigger and better. So we landed Punk and 3 was huge and we had a lot of fun in Baltimore. And then we went a whole year with nothing, because of COVID, there was no Starrcast 5. So that was a little weird, but it was a lot of fun and I'm glad we got to do it.
And I would say there will be another Starrcast, especially coming off this insane time where people are going to be needing that. But you just got to wonder, gosh, what hurdles are going to be attacked, and will masks still be a thing? And just that whole idea of so many people in one place at one time just seems so insane right now. It doesn't even seem like a thing that could happen. That's how crazy this time is right now. What do you think about going forward? I'm not obviously asking you to make a commitment, but I would imagine you're going to do it again. But what do you think that's going to look like?
In 2019 in Chicago, I booked the venue for 20 and 21. So I have a hold at the venue for this year, but I don't know that it'll actually happen. We don't know enough about what's going to happen with the pandemic and COVID and all that. So I would say it's pretty unlikely that it happens this year. And I don't have a contract for next year. I don't know that it would even be available. But if I do another one, because there is an if, not just from a health standpoint, but from well, I have enough time. I've loaded my plate so much more than ever before with all the other new podcasts. I would like to do one more just because I had so many ideas we didn't get to pull off yet. I mean, I had like in my back pocket, here's what I want to do at the next one. And I had some soft commitments from some names that had never been there and things like that. Folks I would really like to work with. So I say all that to say, I don't think it's going to happen this year. And I'm not trying to be negative. I'm trying to be realistic. I would love to do one more if I can, but I don't know when or how that would ever be possible. I'm sure that Michael Bakikio and Hot Spots and WrestleCon will be the leader. I mean, they're the brand that's been so established in that game forever. And if they can figure out how to funnel a bunch of people through a WrestleMania, I'm sure that there will be something. But even this year's WrestleMania, it's going to be 25% capacity or something. Yeah. So the idea that you're going to do it, but it can't be bigger than ever. It's going to be smaller than ever. Part of me wants to say, man, if it's smaller than ever, I don't know that I want to do it. I don't know that I want to have all the additional risk and all the expense and all the overhead and all of the concern for everyone's health, and the reward be literally 25% of what it could be. Let's just wait until things are normal, if that's even a thing again. And if it's not, then there won't be another Starrcast.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. And obviously the next few months, just, I don't know what's going to unfold. Oh, look at that. Look at that. Literally calling as we speak. One and only. What a good guy. He's a legend. Absolutely. Let me see here. I want to get to some. Oh, let's talk about MMA. This is technically an MMA show. Although we bounce all over the place. You like the golden era of MMA, and that's something that I've noticed. We've talked about guys that you brought into Vegas, the Starrcast too, and that was kind of something you wanted to do. What was it about that golden era of MMA, your Shamrocks and your Severns and your Bob Sapps and all that really that you really liked? What was it about that time?
They had more of a pro wrestling approach to promoting the fight back then.
It makes sense. Yeah.
It was just bigger and more trash talk, and it felt more underground and less like sport. It's more sport now than ever before. Everybody's great at every discipline. The genesis of the UFC was all these different specific styles against each other. And now, man, everybody's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and everybody can box, and everybody was a, Division I wrestler. So it's a little less interesting to me than it used to be, but I still pick up almost every UFC. I watched this past week, and I mean, I'm going to continue to watch. I'll always watch, but the characters are not as larger than life anymore. I mean, it's happening whenever Conor fights.
Exactly.
I love Max Holloway, and he's phenomenal to watch, but I miss the old trash talk of a Frank Mir or Tito Ortiz, or the fantastic knockouts of Chuck Liddell, and that Silva, was sort of my heyday. Oh my God, Anderson Silva is the GOAT to me.
He's the GOAT to me. He really is still to this day. I loved that run that he was on. You said you got all the fights back then. I think everybody did. And it was a smaller roster. The roster, I think, is probably tripled in size, if not more than that. They basically got rid of most of their competition. I never have felt like Bellator has ever got to that point. They've tried so hard. It's never been there. Who are the fighters now that you said Max Holloway? Is there any other ones that like really excite you when you see that they're going to be fighting? Is it a Conor? Is it a Diaz? Who are the guys that when you see they're fighting, you got to watch?
I've been a Diaz fan from day one. Nick Diaz was one of my first favorite fighters ever. When Nate came along, I was a huge fan of his. Anytime they're fighting, it's can't miss TV. I love Conor McGregor's promotion. He's a throwback to the the trash talk and the promotion style that the UFC used to do. And obviously he gets what Floyd Mayweather did. So that's always can't miss for my whole family. My dad, who has the least amount of interest of MMA of maybe anybody I know, he never misses a Connor fight because
Yeah.
he's sold on that guy's trash talk. Like, this guy's entertaining, and he wants to see him every time he fights. So I'm definitely a Diaz guy, a Connor guy. I'm sure there's a bunch of others that I'm missing, but those are definitely two of my favorites for sure.
Is there a way you think that they can get back to that excitement? And I feel like, you even hear this with the WWE all the time, how can the WWE, get back to that attitude era, whatever. That mid 2000s era of UFC, I think, was really the precipice of it. I mean, when you had your Forrest Griffin and your Stephen Bonner, and that led into that run, with Silva, et cetera, all these names. Do you feel like the UFC can do anything to get there, or do you think they're too far into the sports realm that that's just what it's going to be from now on?
Well, the fighters now are just better fighters. They're more well round. Easy for me to say, more well rounded.
Sure.
A guy like Forrest Griffin and Stephen Bonner that you and I love that fight so much. I don't
Of
think
course.
we're ever going to see a fight like that again. I don't know that guys like that would fight in the UFC again. They were
Yeah.
great guys. They had a lot of heart. They had a lot of talent, but the talent now is so much greater. Their actual skills. I'm not saying heart. I'm not questioning that. I'm just saying their skill level is so much more advanced that I don't think you'll see fights that were quite as entertaining as that again, where they are just throwing caution to the wind. Now it's much more scientific. It's a much more of a chess match approach. I mean, there are times in that not Conor McGregor, but Forrest Griffin fight with Stephen Bonner.
Yeah.
It's like rock and sock 'em robots. It's a tough man contest. And we're just not going to see that again, I don't think.
Now, we've seen some with your Leonard Garcia. He's one of my favorite fighters. Love that guy. And you see some guys, even with the Poirier and the Conor fight. I mean, although there were some leg kicks, obviously, that led to where it went. At some point, they were just throwing bolo punches. They were just throwing haymakers, and whoever was going to land that shot was going to win. And it was Poirier, and it was a wild victory. And I think, I think Conor still has a lot of gas in the tank, and I think you're going to see Conor really amp it up. And I think he still has a good chance to be a top 5 guy and to make some noise. I think he's that talented. But you do see it when you get two guys that are just the right opponents of each other. You'll still see those fights. So I think you'll get there. I just feel like the UFC as a product, they need to do a little bit of trimming. They need to do some things to really get that excitement again. I will say this. Go ahead.
It won't happen. They made more money than ever last year. They're not going to depart course. So we can say we liked it better back then. We got to go watch it on the network because it's never going to be like that again.
Yeah, you're right. I'd say you're right on that. What about an MMA Starrcast? What about that could work? Why wouldn't it work? Give me your thoughts on that, because there's so many of those larger than life characters, and they do not get the same circuit of conventions and autograph signings that wrestlers do. But there's definitely a big enough field of those guys, even the guys that were in the mid cards, you know what I mean? Those fighters, your Chris Lytles and the Irish hand grenade, Marcus Davis. You think about some of those guys that were just so colorful and so much fun. Those guys are interested. I think people would want to go out there and see that. Do you think an MMA Starrcast works, or why not?
Yeah, I do think it could work. It was actually an idea that I had a few years ago, and I was going to try to work on doing something like that with an MMA podcast. And then, life got in the way. But no,
Sure.
I definitely think it would work for sure. I mean, I think you would want to piggyback a major UFC event where they weren't doing sort of their own fan expo at the exact same time. And if you could do that, I think it would be huge. But it's hard to even have that conversation right now with COVID. I don't know that conventions will ever be a thing again. I hope so, but I'm not optimistic.
Yeah, I know everything will just be over Zoom. How fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Quick hitters here. TNA to this day is still one of the most entertaining things. TNA, the promotion, now Impact Wrestling. I love the stories about TNA because it just seemed like a lot of the time, most of the time, it was so discombobulated and so interesting. And there were so many moving parts and so many stories behind it. I know you're not going to tell me if that's the next podcast, but how interesting is TNA to you? I just love hearing about that promotion.
I would love to do a Jeff Jarrett podcast one day because I think nobody has a story like his. Not only, growing up in the business in Memphis, but the WWF run, the WCW run, the second WWF run, and then being fired on TV,
Yeah, of
to
course.
starting his own thing, and all the craziness with Richard Scrushy and Dixie Carter. And it's a tremendous story. But I think if I ever do a TNA podcast, it would need to be with Jeff Jarrett. That said, yeah, it's been a miracle that it's made it as long as it has. I mean, you think at this point it's lasted longer than WCW. It's unfortunate it hasn't made nearly the impression that WCW did. And I'm fascinated by why that is. I don't know why so many wrestling fans have just always been LOL TNA,
Yeah,
but they've always been the sort of redheaded stepchild of wrestling, and that doesn't make any sense to me. They've had tremendous talent, and they've
sure.
had really good matches, and a lot of great stuff happened there. But it's like it just was not very relevant. I don't know why that is.
If you're watching the network, what's your go-to? So for me, I'm the late WCW. I always go back to those Nitros or those Thunders when it was a hot mess and there were so many different characters and a lot of that didn't really pan out that well. But I love watching those episodes. What's your go-to when you turn on the network?
Well, it used to be like 1989 to 1992 and then 96, 97. But
Okay.
recently I've fallen in love with 86. So 86, um, 89, 90, 91, and 97. Those are my go-tos
Okay.
from
And
WCW or the WWF.
who? So it's funny. The guy that's producing this, Clint. I've always liked really kind of odd wrestlers, not necessarily the guys on top, but I was always a huge D'Lo Brown fan. I was a huge Bruce the Barber Beefcake fan, and I know we have an affectionate name for that on your podcast. But we'll leave that alone. I don't think MediaCom wants to hear that. That being said, love Brutus, love D'Lo Brown. Who were some of those wrestlers that weren't necessarily top guys that you always kind of like to watch, though?
Rick Rude, Tully Blanchard, Paul Orndorff, Sid. Those have been some of my absolute Tracy Smothers.
Ooh,
Some of my
that's a good
absolute
one.
like,
Rest in peace. Yeah, that guy was
yeah,
awesome.
absolutely. These days,
Okay.
Eddie Kingston, I know Kingston just main evented for AEW, but Kingston's the man. I've really enjoyed his AEW stuff.
How you've been around Vince by the I know you have, I'm sure, by this amount of time, and I maybe you've talked about it, but give me, was that maybe one of your biggest mark out moments being around Vince McMahon? I have a feeling it would be, because it would be for me, almost to the point that I want to work for them so bad just so I can be around this guy. What was that like, meeting him, being around him? That has to be an aura.
I met him at a random pay-per-view years ago, maybe 2014 or 15, but shake his hand high and by.
Sure.
But I actually got to hang out and get to know him and have a conversation and spend a little bit of time with him a couple years ago, I guess. And it was surreal. It's like meeting Walt Disney. He does have a presence about him, and it's because what all he's created, and he's been so important to your life and your childhood and your fandom. And then
Yeah.
actually to be in the same room with him, it's like, I kind of don't know what to say or do here because I'd never expected to really be here in this moment. But no, he's a super personable guy, very nice, very polite, and very engaging. You see why he's been successful when you spend a little bit of time with him, and we exchange numbers. So, we'll hit the old happy birthday or Merry Christmases, and,
That's
just
awesome.
exchange pleasantries and niceties, but we're not like boys or nothing.
Do you feel like, you could just wake up at any moment and this was all a dream as the fan? I mean, to me, I think you are the ultimate fan story, like the ultimate fan story. Anybody that watched wrestling, still watches wrestling, what you've done and how you've navigated it, I think it's an incredible story. Do you ever think like maybe this might just be a dream? I might be waking up in Alabama, 13 years old still or something. This was all a dream.
Yeah, listen, I've had so many of those moments, I mean, when I got the big gold belt right over my head right there, that was like a dream. And, I was been lucky enough to snag some Ric Flair robes over the years, and that was like the coolest thing ever. But yeah, to be able to, meet Paul Heyman or text with Paul Heyman, and I love ECW, that was the coolest thing ever. And there's been
Sure.
a lot of those holy cow moments, drinking with Steve Austin and Ric Flair to the wee hours of the night. It's like, what is going on? How am I here?
What is this?
But my day-to-day life is working on this stuff so much that it doesn't always feel like a dream. It feels like, oh, here we go. How do I fit? How do I fit all these podcasts and all the mortgage stuff in today, and still manage to stay married and happy? So, I'm spinning a lot of plates. I'm juggling a lot right now, but every now and again, I do stop and say, this is pretty incredible that this is
Do you
happening.
ever turn off? Do you ever turn off?
Yeah, I mean, she and I will plan a few vacations a year where I'm gonna go out of town and not take a computer and not take a microphone, and there will be
Okay.
extended periods of time where the phone is off.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's something that we do have to focus on just to hit the reset button. But that's been tough during the pandemic. And it was weird because once upon a time when everybody went to the office every day, you had a real sort of start and end point to your workday. But now it's like roll out of bed and come into the office, which is right down the hall, and you're still in your pajamas and you didn't even brush your teeth yet. So, and then, eventually you'll go do all of that stuff. But okay, I'm tired of watching Netflix. I'm going to go back to the office. So there was no off switch this past year. So, work would start at 7 in the morning and it would end at 1 in the morning sometimes, but
Yeah.
you're back and forth. And it was just easy to just walk down the hall. Once upon a time, that was not the case. You had to get dressed, iron your shirt, go to the office, So then when you come home, you're home. Well, now that the home office is a thing for real,
Of course.
not like
Absolutely.
just an on the weekend thing, but an everyday thing, it's hard to turn it off. And that's been a challenge, but I'm having fun with it. That's the thing. I don't feel like I'm sacrificing. I legitimately enjoy doing mortgages. I legitimately enjoy doing wrestling podcasts and creating wrestling conventions and things like that. So I don't feel like I'm working, even though I am.
Yeah. All right. Last question. I know you are a big fan of hip hop.
Yeah,
Give me your top 5 albums.
man, that's hard. I don't really have a top 5
Or
album.
just give me some of your favorites. We won't have to go into numbered lists and such, but just give me some of your best ones.
Well, I mean, Kanye West has had so many great ones. I don't know that I would be able to pick one, but there's a lot of his stuff that you maybe overlook at first, but you hear it again for the first time years later, and you're like, wow, that was better than I thought.
College Dropout's always mine. I
Yeah.
love that album. Love that album.
And Jay-Z has some of those too. The Black Album was not one that a lot of people would list, but man, that's a bit of a sleeper. It's
That's great.
fantastic. Some of that old school Outcast stuff is really, really phenomenal. I was never really an Eminem guy, but I liked everything Dre did. Obviously the first Chronic and 2001 were fantastic. And it's not exactly everybody's taste, but I love 2 Chainz. I don't know why. I also loved Kodak Black, and I know that he's not anybody's favorite, but I don't know why he tickles me, but he does. And I'm not always looking for these deep, thought-provoking lyrics. Every now and again, I just want it to be lighthearted and silly, and he sort of checks that box. And so
Yeah.
does Riff Raff, who occasionally will put out
Wow.
something that is
Riff
laugh out
Raff.
loud hilarious. And
Yeah.
I like Yellow Wolf. He's an Alabamian and he's got sort of a hybrid style, which is kind of fun. And I'm all over the place with hip hop. I don't think there are any rules in music. So I appreciate when people try different stuff.
100%. Well, that was a lot. Conrad, thank you for giving me so much time. I know you're a busy, busy man. So many things to do. Adfreeshows.com. All the podcasts are incredible. Anybody that's watching this, that was an old school fan, you say you're just a fight fan and you gave up with the WWF stuff and blah, 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 blah. Go check out the podcast. Enjoy it. It's incredible stuff. And say hi to the family for me. And thank you so much for giving me a few minutes.
Hey, thanks, man. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you mentioning that our wrestling podcasts are nostalgia. We're not talking anything current. So if you grew up on Ric Flair or Hulk Hogan, my pods are for you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Conrad.
Thank you.
And there he is, Conrad Thompson, the one and only. So big thanks to Pat Contry for Conrad for joining us. And we will see you next time. Check us out on all of our social media. I'm Cyrus Fees. See you next time on In This Corner.